John had always prided himself on being calm and trusting, living a life free of unnecessary drama. His marriage to Jenna was the center of his world, a bond built on years of love and mutual respect. They had met in college and quickly realized they were perfect for each other. Jenna was kind, driven, and ambitious, qualities John admired and supported with unwavering loyalty. Their relationship was solid, a foundation of trust that allowed for open communication and the feeling of security. They had their routines, quiet dinners, weekend walks, and late-night talks about their dreams and aspirations. There was no reason to believe anything would shake the happiness they shared. John never had reason to doubt her. He was the kind of man who saw the best in people, especially in his wife. Everything was perfect. Little did he know that beneath the surface, something was slowly starting to unravel. He wouldn't notice it right away, too trusting in the life they had built together. But over time, things would begin to change. Jenna's promotion at work was something they both had been anticipating for months. It meant more responsibility and longer hours, but it also opened the door to bigger opportunities. John, as always, supported her fully. He assured her that he understood the late nights and weekend commitments. After all, this was her dream job. But soon, those long hours became a fixture in their lives. The once quiet evenings together started to become more and more rare, with Jenna often coming home late, tired, and distracted. John didn't mind at first. He was proud of her, and he understood how important her work was. However, as time went on, small changes began to take root. Jenna became more vague about her day-to-day activities, often brushing off his questions about her work with brief responses. Her attention seemed to drift away during their conversations, her mind elsewhere. She'd often take calls late at night and leave for work early on weekends. John, ever the trusting husband, began to feel a slight unease, but he quickly dismissed it. Maybe it was just the stress of the new role, he thought. He reassured himself that everything would settle down eventually. But deep down, there was a nagging feeling he couldn't shake, a subtle shift in the air that he didn't yet understand. One evening, while John was grabbing his jacket from the back seat of the car, his phone buzzed with a message. It wasn't his phone, though. It was Jenna's. She had left it on the dashboard face up. John almost didn't glance at it, but something made him stop. A text message was open, and he saw her boss's name at the top. "Looking forward to our dinner tonight. Maybe I'll remind you how much you owe me." His heart skipped a beat. The message was cryptic and unsettling, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He quickly glanced away and returned the phone to where it had been, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping up his spine. That night, after Jenna returned home late as usual, he couldn't stop thinking about the text. He had to ask her about it. When he finally did, she brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just a joke," she said. "You know how he is. Always trying to be funny. You're being paranoid." But John wasn't convinced. The words "owe me" stuck with him, and a deep sense of doubt began to creep in. It didn't add up, and while he tried to convince himself it was nothing, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next few days were filled with quiet unease. John knew he had to find out the truth. His gut told him that the text was more than just a joke. Jenna had never seemed nervous or anxious before when talking about her boss, but now something felt off. John did his research. He learned that her boss often took clients or colleagues to a particular upscale restaurant, a private area away from the main dining room. Jenna had mentioned a working dinner with him earlier in the week. He knew she would be there that night. The decision was made. John couldn't let it go any longer. He would confront the situation head-on. He didn't want to believe the worst, but the idea of not knowing, of continuing to trust her without knowing the full picture, felt worse. He'd never been the type to spy or question, but now it seemed necessary. The trust between them had already begun to crack, and he needed to know if it was something he could fix, or if it was already beyond repair. It was time to find out the truth. No more doubts. He would see for himself. John arrived early, his nerves a knot in his stomach. The upscale restaurant was dimly lit, with hushed conversation and clinking glasses surrounding him. He tried to steady his breathing as he walked through the main dining area, his eyes scanning for any sign of Jenna and her boss. He was directed to a secluded area at the back, past heavy curtains that separated the private dining rooms from the rest of the restaurant. The host looked at him hesitantly as he made his way toward the space, as if unsure whether to let him through. But John's resolve was firm. He knew the layout well enough from past discussions with Jenna. With each step, the tension in his chest grew. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. What would he find? Was he being paranoid? Would this be the confirmation of his worst fears? Or was it just an innocent dinner between colleagues? As he approached the curtain, his heart pounded louder, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was about to find out exactly what had been happening behind his back. John pushed aside the curtain and stepped into the private dining room. There they were, Jenna sitting across from her boss, Tom. The moment they saw him, everything froze. Jenna's face went pale, and her eyes widened in shock. Tom's smirk faltered, but he quickly regained his composure, leaning back in his chair as if he were expecting this all along. John's calm demeanor contrasted with the rising fury inside him. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet anger. Jenna's hands trembled as she reached for her glass of wine, but she didn't speak. Tom, on the other hand, tried to laugh it off. "This is a misunderstanding, John. Nothing's going on, just business," he said, his tone too casual. But John wasn't buying it. "A misunderstanding? You've been sending her messages like the one I saw on her phone. Messages about owing you. Don't try to play innocent now." Jenna's eyes welled with tears and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tom, sensing the gravity of the situation, sat up straighter. "Look, we didn't mean any harm. It's just a little joke between us," he said, but the words felt hollow. "I don't think so," John replied coldly. "I've seen the way you look at her. I've heard the whispers. It's not a joke. And I have the proof." John pulled out his phone, showing them the texts and recordings. Tom's face drained of color as the truth settled in. The smugness was gone, replaced with panic. "You can't do this," Tom stammered. "I already have," John said, his voice firm. "You're done. Jenna's moving to a new department. You're going to make sure of that. Or else." The tension in the room was palpable. John's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. He had the evidence, texts, phone records, and even the recordings of their conversations. Tom, once so confident, was now visibly rattled. The game was over. "You can't threaten me like this," Tom blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was caught, and he knew it. John didn't flinch. "I've already threatened you, Tom. If you don't transfer Jenna out of your department, I'll make sure this all comes out. The texts, the phone calls, everything. Your career will be over." Jenna's face was red with shame, but she didn't say anything. She knew the truth now. She had been part of something that John couldn't ignore. Tom's bravado faded. "Fine, I'll transfer her. Just don't do anything crazy," he said, his voice shaky. John nodded, his gaze hard. "Good. You're lucky I don't make this public. You're not going to ruin her career." John turned to Jenna, who was now crying, her face buried in her hands. "We're done," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "You'll have to figure this out on your own." The drive home was silent, the weight of what had just transpired hanging over them. Jenna's tears filled the car, but John remained quiet, his mind a whirl of hurt and betrayal. He had confronted the boss, exposed the truth, and secured the transfer, but now he was left with the shattered pieces of his marriage. Jenna reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "I don't know what to say," she whispered through her sobs, her voice barely audible. But John couldn't bring himself to comfort her. How could he, after everything that had happened? The trust that once held them together was gone, replaced by a cold, painful void. John's thoughts were a tangled mess. Could he ever forgive her? Could they ever go back to what they had? The answer felt uncertain, and no amount of tears could erase the hurt. The damage had been done. By the time they arrived home, John was exhausted. emotionally drained from the confrontation and the aftermath. Jenna pleaded for forgiveness, her words frantic and desperate. "Please, John. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you. Please don't leave." John stood at the door, his heart heavy. He had always been the calm one, the one who trusted without question. But trust had been shattered beyond repair, and he couldn't ignore the gnawing pain inside him. He needed space to think. "I need time," he said quietly, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of the moment. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Jenna's face crumpled as she tried to reach out, but John stepped back, turning toward the door. There were no guarantees in life, no promises that things would go back to normal. He didn't know what the future held, but he couldn't stay in a marriage built on broken trust. The road ahead was unclear, but he needed time to heal. The consequences were swift. Tom, the boss, lost his job, his reputation tarnished by the exposure of his inappropriate behavior. Jenna, too, faced the fallout as her actions came to light. The transfer was just the beginning of a difficult journey for her. But for John, the hardest part was still to come. He had made the decision to walk away, knowing that the marriage he once cherished could never return to its former state. He found peace in his decision, though it didn't come without pain. Sometimes justice wasn't about grand gestures. It was about taking back control of your life. For John, standing up for himself had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was the right thing. As he walked away from the life he once knew, he understood that some wounds ran too deep to heal overnight. The future was uncertain, but he would never be the same, and maybe that was the only way forward.